to press this. Okay, you can go.
Hi, and welcome to Feeding the Family podcast. I'm your host, Jill Troderman. MSG, also known as Mayo sodium glutamate, an ingredient found in Chinese food and other savory dishes. Many people associate this ingredient as benign. MSG is found naturally in some foods, and the FDA says it's safe to eat. Even acclaimed researchers from Harvard and the Mayo Clinic state there is no evidence showing these additives are harmful. Yet many people claim it negatively impacts their health. So are these people making up health claims, or is there really something to pay attention to? Today, I want to give a warm welcome to my guest, Dr. Katie Reid, the founder of Unblind My Mind, Incorporated, a nonprofit organization dedicated to improving the health of individuals and families through informed food choices. Since earning a PhD in biochemistry in 1996, Katie has held scientific leadership positions in numerous Silicon Valley biotechnology companies. Her research has focused primarily on protein chemistry in the development of cancer pharmaceuticals and diagnostics. Today, Katie works closely with the public, some through physicians, to devise food solutions for people suffering from a wide variety of chronic inflammatory conditions. Working in collaboration with the medical, education, farming, and various communities, Katie creates a data-driven food solutions approach through the design and development of diagnostic tests and interpretation of lab results. Welcome, Katie.
Oh, thank you for having me on the show.
I am so excited that we finally get to have this awesome conversation.
I know, and it's so nice to be in a studio rather than working from home and not these, virtual podcasts. So this is wonderful. What a lovely studio.
Thank you. Yeah, we're excited to have you. And even more importantly, today is Autism Awareness Day.
Oh, the whole month is.
The whole month.
If it's not taken away. But yes, April is traditionally Autism Awareness Month, so this is very timely.
It's very, very timely. And I wanted to share with our listeners that you recently launched a book. You just published it. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And the title is called Fat, Stressed, and Sick, MSG, Processed Foods, and America's Health Crisis. Wow, that is quite a title.
That is a title.
Tell me, I know you have so much to share, but why did you choose that very insightful title?
Well, some of it was publisher influence, where they're looking for some of that shock element. But as the book goes into great detail, the chronic inflammatory conditions are leading to obesity, lots of stress like anxiety, depression, and so forth. Even cancer. And so, I go into great detail as to why glutamate in excess in the body, also known as MSG or monosodium glutamate in our foods, is leading to a lot of health issues, chronic inflammatory conditions. So fat, stressed, and sick came to be, adored.
Yeah, and I think maybe that describes, unfortunately, where a lot of people are in the United States. Is that true?
True, right? So we're dealing with obesity, like 70% of our population is overweight. And so we are dealing with chronic inflammatory conditions. People, like 70% of our population even has one chronic inflammatory conditions. Most people have two. And so we're dealing with a sick population.
Indeed. And tell us more about MSG and how that impacts our health. Most people might not even know that MSG is what you and I might consider a toxin. And you've mentioned inflammation a few times already. So is inflammation and MSG really tied in together?
Yes. And so, it's important to note that glutamate is a neurotransmitter found naturally in our body, and it is found naturally in some foods. So what I'm speaking to in the book is the excess consumption that's coming through the processing that's intentionally enriching and fortifying our foods with glutamate. And they're doing it because of the corporate, the shares of, they call it the stomach share. It makes us addicted. It makes us want this food more. And that will bring people eating that food more. So it's designed to bring us back and hijack our brains into thinking this food is good, but it's not good for our bodies. So yes, inflammation, I go through a bunch of different pathways as to how glutamate is causing inflammation when it's consumed in excess. And our bodies will actually produce glutamate as part of the stress response. So we can produce all the glutamate where, when, and how much we need in response to our environmental input signals. So that's going on in the body. But you can imagine if somebody's already in a fight, flight, fear, fawn survival response, such as prone to anxiety or depression, that getting it also from the food is only exacerbating those survival responses.
Okay, so are you saying that when people have something called toxic load, that something like MSG will impact that person a lot worse than somebody who just has MSG or other additives on occasion?
Exactly. The more inflamed you already are at your baseline, the more sensitive or vulnerable you'll be to the consumption of, MSG being at levels that are not going to be considered healthy. So what's considered healthy would be glutamate coming in from whole foods, not commercially processed. That's what we've been evolutionarily conserved to receive in our food supply. It's now, you mentioned the in the bio, and thank you for that.
For sure.
The protein chemistry is the background that allowed me to kind of dissect this. The processing of the proteins is obliterating or degrading the protein, and it's breaking apart the protein into its subunits of amino acids, and glutamate is an amino acid. So
Which is a protein for people who might not know.
Right. So the amino acids are the building blocks of a protein.
Right.
And so glutamate is an amino acid. So if you obliterate the protein through the processing, such as fermentation or high acid conditions or high, stress or whatever chemical process, you start to increase the free glutamate going on in that particular food item. And that then acts like an excitatory neurotransmitter in our body that gives us this, it tastes good initially, but it's causing all sorts of fat, stress, and sick.
Right. Now, we know that you've mentioned the inflammation. What is happening in the brain when people who are super sensitive to these glutamates, what is actually happening? Are they sweating, having heart palpitations, anxiety? Like, what are some other concerns? So when people are eating these foods, they can sort of pay attention to see if they're having a reaction, if they're not even aware that it's in the food. And that's something I want to get into with you, because I know they sneak it into our food system and they don't always call it MSG. So
right.
we'll dive into that in a minute. But can you share with the audience some conditions that people might experience?
Yeah, and that varies depending on the individual. Because it's a neurotransmitter, meaning it is a signal or a chemical messenger for our nervous system, and you can imagine that our neural network is all throughout our body. But these are directly going from like gut to brain, gut to heart, gut to all sorts of different, parts. So you can have heart palpitations, you can have extreme headaches, you could have sweating through the whole temperature regulation. So depending on what maybe somebody's weak chain link is in their body, you might have different symptoms. So depression, there's even a glutamate-based depression category for people who are actually vulnerable to depression through glutamate. Anxiety, cancer. There's so many different things that are linked to excess glutamate. And if you look at, and I'm a geeky scientist, but the metabolic pathways in our body that involve glutamate, it's involved in insulin secretion. So there's a diabetes connection. It's involved in energy balance. So thus the obesity or fats in the title.
Like metabolism, how people are...
Right. So energy balance can be skewed from excessive glutamate, and then you can think about the insulin secretion response. So it's also a cell receptor on many of our cells. Glutamate is the key that unlocks a lot of these cell receptors. So you have a bunch of different cell functions that are going and getting triggered and turned on through glutamate binding to these cell receptors. So there's a whole host, and that's why there's a whole chapter in my book dedicated to, here's a variety of different things. So I came to this whole story because my youngest was diagnosed with autism.
Yes, please tell the story. I know the story, and I'll mention it right now that Katie, when I first learned about you, you had just done a TED Talk, and I was totally blown away. So please share with everybody what your experience was with your daughter.
Yeah, so my youngest was diagnosed with autism, and at that point I didn't even know what autism was. So, I'm just searching and what is this and what can I do as a parent, and a little bit blown away. Going through the medical journey was a little, well, frustrating would be an understatement. And the evaluation to even just get her through the process of, okay, she's diagnosed with the condition of autism, and what do you do to support that? Getting the support lined up through whether it was medical or education was taking a while to get in place. So I decided to start researching things and deciding, okay, what can I do to support her now? And at the time, as a parent observing her, I'm looking at a child who really wasn't experiencing a great quality of life. Her demeanor just always seemed very, and I wouldn't even say sad. There wasn't any expressions on her face at that point. There wasn't any communication. It wasn't going back and forth. She really didn't like to play with children or recognize playing with children. Her language was severely delayed. So, I was looking at a child that wasn't experiencing a great quality of life at that point, or it was hard to tell what was going on in her brain, and there wasn't a lot of interaction.
And you have other children, so it's not like she was your first kid and you didn't really know what to look for, essentially, with milestone developments, right? So you had other two quote-unquote healthy kids that didn't have any autism
Correct.
symptoms. Is that right?
Yeah, yet I still was kind of like, okay, I don't know. I didn't know what autism was. So I was definitely,
Fair enough, yeah.
Educating myself, researching, what can I do? So the first thing I did do is kind of looked at her diet and said, wow, her diet stinks. It was all white processed, bagels and cream cheese and pizza and macaroni and cheese. And if I tried to put broccoli on that kid's plate, she would throw a fit. I mean, like full-blown fit. And I was backing away and saying, oh, okay, I don't want to fight that battle. But then I decided, well, maybe it's time to fight that battle. And so, really started to kind of look at what she was eating and, thinking about what nutrients were necessary for brain function, gut function. She had a lot of inflammatory conditions like allergies and such like that. So I'm like, okay, she's inflamed. What can I do? So started to explore, and I, removed gluten, which is a class of proteins found in wheat, casein, which is a class of proteins found in dairy, removed those, and I started a smoothie routine. So that was like my first step. Like, had no idea what the heck I was doing, but I was thinking it can't be worse than what she's eating now. It could have been worse, but there was a lot of room for improvement. So I did see some improvements, so a little bit better eye contact, a little bit better imaginary play, but not like normally typical for her age. But I was like, oh, I didn't even realize imagination wasn't there until imagination started to pop up.
Wow.
And, so little things, but she was still considered moderate on the spectrum, still in special needs school, in the queue for going to special needs school. So I knew we weren't quite out of the realm of, okay, this is the best quality of life she can have. Mm-hmm. So I started to explore deeper, what's the connection here between gluten and casein removal that would cause some improvements in cognition, language, or whatever. And that's when I started to stumble across, if I looked at the amino acid structure of gluten and casein, their protein structure has 25% glutamic acid or glutamate. But they're never consumed raw. You're fermenting it, you're hydrolyzing it, you're doing all sorts of processing to those proteins before we consume them. So I started to stumble upon, okay, glutamate. Well, and then if you go into Google Scholar and type in glutamate and whatever chronic inflammatory condition, glutamate autism, glutamate ADHD, glutamate diabetes, you'll see tons of research on, okay, there's connections. So I decided to design a 1-month experiment where I'm consciously trying to remove all glutamate sources. And that's when I became a detective, where I'm looking at Google patents of foods to look at what the heck they're doing to the foods to see if they're degrading the proteins that would potentially release glutamate and cause a bunch of MSG getting into our food supply. In that 1-month experiment, launched my journey.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And people, I'm sure, understand that glutamate is that umami flavor that's very savory. And is that what's in like meats and to make things more tasty, and the FDA has approved this. For how many years has this been in our food supply? 50, 60, 70 years?
And right now we have like 3.5 million metric tons of MSG being produced, just wholeheartedly pure MSG being dumped into the food supply, worldwide.
Wow.
And that's the labeled stuff.
Right.
Then there's all the unlabeled stuff, which represents 90% more of it coming through the processing of the proteins.
Right. When you and I did an event together, I received one of your flyers, and it had at least 50 different words for MSG. One of them is yeast extract.
Right. So these are...
Can you tell us more about, and how can parents and people in general be the detective that you had to become to decipher that?
Right. So the ingredients don't always represent a single entity ingredient. They're representing, okay, here is a bunch of processing. So soy protein isolate, is representing a process, and it's processing the proteins, and you're getting a lot of byproducts from that processing. So in the book, as well as like you said, when I do lectures and such, I have, a table to kind of give people an idea. Here's all the hidden sources of MSG coming into the food supply. Soy sauce, whey protein isolates, a lot of these protein powders, protein bars.
Protein drinks. I mean, people really rely on those things for nourishment.
Right. So cured meats, anything that they're really processing of a high protein foods, especially, is you're going to have the greater, content of MSG being generated. And so, just giving people, so if I say you could try to become, a detective and a scientist and decipher all the ingredients on your, Doritos package, or you can just pick up a organic cabbage and there's no ingredients to decipher. There's not this detective and chemical, specialty required. You're knowing what your food is because it's not processed. And that's really the bulk of it, is the more you know your food sources, it's not processed, and knowing the process, and no labels required to put the manufacturing process on there.
100%. Now, these processed foods are called ultra-processed foods, and they're also known to be highly palatable, right? So things like MSG, and what are some other additives that are super highly palatable that might be associated with MSG, like aspartame or are there other things that are on your alert list?
Well, I mean, I think if you ended up saying, okay, I'm going to try to remove glutamate that's enriched and fortified in the food supply, you end up getting rid of a lot of the processed foods, which then takes care of like corn syrup and all these other names for sugars and guanylate and things that are used to make monosodium glutamate, even more active. And, you get a lot of the food colorings and all these other things you get rid of, by that. So is there a lot of other stuff? Absolutely. I focused on one evildoer in the food supply, but there's many others.
There are so many others. So I think maybe 90% of all people's foods are coming from packages. I think that's the current statistics. And it used to be 90% of all our food came from farms. So we've almost reversed that, which makes sense for why people are
fat, stressed, and sick.
Fat, stressed, and sick. Exactly.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the ultra processed category.
Right.
And that's what was blowing me away when I was doing research for the book. This ultra processed category, we're like you said, we're consuming so much in the ultra processed category. So packaged or not packaged, I mean, that's a huge, it's like over 50% of our foods is being consumed in that ultra processed category. And that's the opposite of going onto a farm and eating farm fresh food.
100%. Now, kids get addicted to this stuff. Is it actually addictive and they crave it because they like the tasty and the salt and...
It's everybody.
Everybody. It doesn't matter about kids or adults. It's the same.
Right.
We're all
And that's
susceptible.
why it's in the food supply. Like I said, it's the stomach share. It helps for corporate profits. But, you're right. We have glutamate receptors on our tongue. It's part of our taste receptors, So we've got the sweet, we've got the bitter, we've got the sour. We do have NAMI. So we are conserved evolutionarily to, pick up this glutamate or NAMI, and it's evolutionarily conserved to tell our brain, oh, this is a good protein source of food,
Right.
For tomatoes, it's signaling what's a ripe tomato, because these were survival things when we were out there in the hunter-gatherer stage, these were necessary for survival. Well, the food industry has completely hijacked our taste receptors to make us think, okay, we want more and so forth, and we become fat, stressed, and sick, like the title of the book.
Right, yeah, sugar. They've figured that one out too. There are so many things that these manufacturers have really figured out, and it's so unfortunate. How is your daughter today? How is she still on that path?
So now she's 18. And of course, when a child goes through the teenage stage, they think their parents don't know squat.
Right.
So I would say she's in the rebellious phase. Okay. And what's interesting is, I'm not sure, in clinical trials when you do, trialing out whether it's a supplement or, trying to get a drug approved, you can do something what's called a crossover study, where you take a group of people and you have it before you actually do whatever the study's for. So let's say it's for glutamate. So before removing glutamate, we're going to look at what people's health conditions were, and then you're going to remove glutamate. What happens to the people? What are the conditions? And then you challenge them again with that glutamate. Do the symptoms come back? So I've done a double crossover essentially with my daughter, where she started out with just standard American diet. Then she went through about 10 years where we were super, 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 super clean, and she was thriving, absolutely doing her best, disposition-wise or mood-wise, probably the happiest she's ever been. But then she says, Mom, you don't know what you're talking about. This has nothing to do with foods, and is now trying the experiment. And I'm seeing some things coming back, like obsessive compulsive, kind of, really having a hard time with controlling her thoughts, sometimes the sleep, sometimes emotional regulation. So it's interesting to kind of just observe that. But because she's an adult, she's now being handed the journey, and I'm there for support and unconditional love, like we all do as mothers, and watching the journey.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's intense for you to have to step back and almost let her go through that scientific discovery that you went through.
Exactly.
And she probably will. And she will.
Or she won't, and it's out of my control.
Right, like all of us.
Right.
We all have those temptations and like to be soothed by that. Katie, this is so interesting, and you're not alone. I'm not alone as a parent. We all have struggled with teaching our kids how to eat well, and clearly you have done that deep dive into that. So listeners, we will be right back after a short break.
I forgot to say who you are. Okay, is it working?
And everyone is welcome.
You need a clean, pleasant space to conduct business, but you don't want the burden of a long, expensive lease. Your solution is Satellite Co-working and Digital Media Studio on Soquel Avenue. Satellite offers private offices, meeting and conference rooms, even co-working by the hour, day, week, or month. Schedule a tour at satellitecoworking.com. Mention Santa Cruz Voice for 20% off your first reservation.
Hey, Warren, it's been a while since I've been up to your showroom and garden center in Scotts Valley. Maybe the folks out there might want to know where you are.
Absolutely. To find Knox Roofing and the Knox Garden Box Company, just head up into beautiful Scotts Valley. We're at 46 El Pueblo Road, next door to Scarborough Lumber and the beautiful nursery. And when it comes to wood items, we have It's All About Wood gift shop. And, of course, the Knox Garden Box. Lots to look at. We'd love to see you at Knox Roofing and the Knox Garden Box store. Okay, thanks, folks.
Cannabis is one of nature's most beneficial plants, and at Treehouse Dispensary, we use it to build community. In addition to dispensing cannabis and education, Treehouse hosts First Friday events every month that feature our community's local artists, makers, and activists. If you're 21 plus,
you'll be helping the Voice team construct a powerful infrastructure, one that we can all be proud of. To donate your time, your money, or both, go to SantaCruzVoice.com and click support. SantaCruzVoice.com and click support.
Get hooked up with affordable cannabis at your locally owned Hook outlet, where everybody above the age of 21 can participate in the Hook's loyalty program. Each purchase earns you 2% store credit on your next purchase. Get hooked up with the best cannabis at affordable prices at the Hook outlet in Capitola and Watsonville, or order online at hookoutlet.com. Get hooked up at the Hook.
Okay, folks, we are back. And I am Jill Troderman. You are listening to Feeding the Family on Santa Cruz Voice, santacruzvoice.com. Today in the studio, I have my guest. Her name is Dr. Katie Reid, and we are talking about autism, and we are talking about MSG. Katie is an author of Fat, Stressed, and Sick, MSG, Processed Foods, and America's Health Crisis. So let's get into a little bit, now that we've identified some of the symptoms people can have if they're eating MSG. We talked about depression, anxiety, heart palpitations, physiological stuff, mental stuff. Now, with all those parents out there and adults who are eating this food, maybe they're making some associations now, like, oh, I understand those feelings. How can parents navigate what foods to eat? Are you asking every single parent to read labels and to be really detectives, and they're going to for sure experience some battles?
Oh, yeah.
And it's worth it, right?
That's exactly it. I mean, so like I said, when I first discovered, like my daughter's throwing an absolute hissy fit with the broccoli on the plate, and I mean, like literally she would jump straight up, fold in her knees, and slam her knees down on a cement floor to say, no, I'm not eating the broccoli. I mean, the fit was significant.
It was real.
And like I said, it's a battle worth fighting because, she completely was able to, her language, and people are like, how can food have anything to do with language? There's no studies that are showing that. I'm like, oh, no. Because language requires so many neural network connections and cognitive development. If you are inflamed, your body's energy priorities are going to the inflammatory response. It's part of survival. And you don't focus on the neural network or the neurons firing and developing certain things like language, imaginary play, social. And you can imagine like somebody who's feeling a severe migraine headache. They don't want to be any sound. They don't want the light. They want to be in a closet. They want to be dark. They want to be removed. And you can imagine that somebody who's experiencing significant inflammatory sort of symptoms, and that they don't want to be socializing. They don't want to be thinking about developing language and such. And it's a struggle for them to even want or even to pick up the signals to develop language because they're so inflamed. So a lot of parents will come to me, and I do work with families one-on-one or working with groups, and people will say my child's a picky eater. There's just no way I can do this, and so the parents then I have to work with the parents and calm their anxiety, calm their barriers down, and say, I've never lost a child to starvation, and I guarantee that if you retrain your child's taste receptors, they will be more receptive to the real foods. They're hijacked right now with the standard American diet, SAD, and you have to get those foods out. And they're like, well, can I just do it, a little bit, and I'm like, it's like saying, can you give your child a little bit of crack and expect them to be able to overcome the addiction? You really have to remove the addicting foods in order for their taste receptors to be clean and receptive to real foods. And so and
that's not fun.
Oh, you go through withdrawals.
No parent wants to be put in that situation, but you're saying it has to be the parent. The parent has to step up and override the discomfort that they're going to experience by setting limits, by having to say no, but maybe adding more happy foods for the kids to enjoy so they're not feeling deprived, right?
Yeah, happy foods, and there's a lot of foods
Happy
that
foods meaning good, like good quality, healthy
good quality
foods. I'm
that
not
you're
talking
making.
about ice cream and
Oh, yeah.
junk food. I'm talking about real food.
Yeah, like I have an almond cake, in my recipe book in the book. It's like, almonds, eggs, oranges, and cinnamon, and, some dates. It's like, it's all whole foods. And that used to be our birthday cake or special occasion kind of cake. Or you can come up with muffins, slap some icing on it. That's like a beet date glaze and call it a cupcake. It's all how you are selling the foods. And if they're not getting a Costco cupcake, they're going to be more receptive to the cupcakes you're making that are all whole food. So it really is about, and I say that there's lots of values that we have in our family homes. Mm-hmm. What is it that you value? If you value health, great. I'm advocating for everybody to value health. But it's just like if you're valuing, limits on social media or limits on swearing in the household or, you don't tolerate physical violence. I mean, these are all values that we're trying to raise our children and, people or whatever, be good human beings, healthy,
right,
quality of life. And so I advocate for families to structure it where this is an important value, mm-hmm. that it's about the foods, and you are teaching your children an important lesson that is not taught in schools. It's not taught at soccer. It's not taught, with grandma's house even. It has to be coming from the home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a statistic is children listen to about 11,000 commercials, negative food commercials a year. So just think about how much influence a parent really has to do to step up. That's a big job. But parents also need to get the community involved, the grandparents, like you mentioned, the friends. So it really does need to be an effort from all the loved ones in the kids' family. It really is an effort we do need to make in the United States of America.
Absolutely. It absolutely takes a village. And I do think that you start with your, kind of your smaller community and you kind of branch out. But I do advocate for parents, hey, if your school is feeding your kids cupcakes for kids' birthdays, this is the time to step up saying, my kid doesn't need a cupcake every single time the 35, kid classroom is having a birthday.
Yeah, that's almost every week.
Yeah,
they're
exactly. And there's like holidays and such like that. And so, there's ways of doing it. I really love and support schools that are saying that there's a no food sharing policy and they're not, distributing food because there are so many food allergies too that it's a liability for the schools.
Sure. Nowadays it is.
Right. And so it's a great thing to be like, okay, the parents have control over what their kids are eating and that they're taking ownership of what their kids are getting at school, even soccer. I remember I had, my kids in soccer. Every single game, after the game, it was a popsicle being delivered. And so that was part of what I had to do with my daughter is make her homemade popsicles made out of, fruit juice and, fresh squoze fruit to deliver there because I didn't want her to have this artificial colored and, a bunch of refined sugars in the popsicle.
I was right there with you. I wish we had known each other back then. We would have supported each other, I'm sure.
Yeah. And it's like, do we really need to be giving popsicles every single soccer game? I mean, it was ridiculous. And then, trying to corral the parents into, okay, who's going to be bringing the popsicle? I'm like, nobody needs to be bringing popsicles at the end of the game. A good pat on the back. You did a great job in the game. Okay, let's go home and
have dinner
and walk the dog or whatever.
Right, and play catch in the yard.
Yeah.
Right. We've definitely taken food as a quote unquote reward. And I know parents bribe their kids like, hey, if you just do X, Y, and Z, you get to have this treat. And we're really sending very mixed messages to our children because now they're getting harmed, unfortunately, by our U.S. food supply. We know that Europeans and Asian foods are a lot healthier. Unfortunately, we have about 10,000 untested chemicals that are allowed into our food system, and Europe only has 300. So we have thousands of food ingredients to navigate. That is a very overwhelming task for parents. What are some very common foods that people can avoid that are sold in the grocery store without throwing some brands under the bus? And what are some replacement foods that parents can enjoy making and providing for their children?
Yeah, so the savory sort of snacks, like, Doritos, Fritos, a lot of those, obviously oh gosh, what the Pringles. I mean, like there's so many of those savory snacks that add
The crunchy snacks.
Yeah, the crunchy savory.
Got it.
And so just doing like something with an air fryer with a bunch of roasted vegetables where you're putting on some, nice olive oil on top and some, garlic or whatnot or rosemary or whatnot, and just having like, okay, you can have some beet chips or, sweet potato chips or even red potato chips, so where you're kind of giving that crunch. And, some kids, especially when I'm working with kids on the spectrum, they'll have a particular preference for a type of food. They only eat crunchy or they will not eat mushy. So I try to tailor towards what their texture preferences are and kind of bring in real foods with those texture preferences and then try to expand their acceptance to, okay, can they eat a little bit less crunchy and okay, like can we work in mushy and it's all, whole foods.
So starting basically with where the kids' natural preferences are and working slowly to create a healthier food environment, essentially.
Yeah, and I mean, and there's some, massive addictions that I'm dealing with. Like, okay, my kid will only eat foods with ketchup. I mean, they will put ketchup on everything. And I'm like, okay, you take that Heinz bottle of ketchup, you dump it, and you stick in your own homemade ketchup. And I guarantee you're going to nip that little visual association and addiction in the bud because they can put all the ketchup they want on all over their foods, and it's homemade with a bunch of your own herbs, spices, and pureed tomatoes. And so like, another common one is like these store-bought frozen like chicken nuggets or, fish sticks or something, right?
Pizza pockets and all those kind of
so it's like
frozen.
Throw that stuff out, put your own homemade stuff in, guarantee you'll break that addiction saying this is what is bought from the store now, and especially with the younger kids that, works like the 4-year-old and the 5-year-old and the 6-year-old.
Yeah, they don't know.
I don't know.
They don't know.
I told my daughter, I'm like, oh, the bagel store closed down. This is what we're eating for breakfast.
Right. And I think that's what parents really need, encouragement and support, that you can do it. I did it with my kids. My family rallied. But it takes a strong back.
It does. It takes a lot of persistence and, and definitely some like, oh, this tastes terrible. If you are just trying out this whole new, routine and lifestyle.
Yeah,
you're
make
like,
it taste good, folks.
Yeah, you try to make it taste good. And, sometimes I did bomb in the middle or the beginning rather. And I do remember when my daughter was turning 12, she was like, Mom, can I have, waffles that aren't green for my birthday? And I was like, sure, because I was putting all sorts of green vegetables in my waffle, batters all the time.
And it's not green from food coloring. It's
no.
from spinach, I bet.
It's like kale is always the thing that was going into the, the waffle batters. And, so it was just kind of cute. Like, at 12, she's still like, can my waffles not be green, But, so she got used to, seeing a lot of her foods being green and accepted that. And, obviously, like I said in the beginning, I'm dealing with the rebellious 18-year-old now, but like it's a journey. But yeah, I tell parents like it really is a battle worth fighting. A family value of if you value your child's health, of course you do. This is what you need to do. You cannot be feeding them the standard American diet and expect them to be not plagued with some sort of inflammatory condition. And they do often come in the form of mental health issues.
Right. And the mental health is a scary one because there might be tantrums involved, like you said, and anxiety, depression. Those are upsetting things to have to deal with for a parent.
Yeah.
But it couldn't be more important to clean up the kids' diet. So what are some favorite foods that your daughter does enjoy now that when she's not rebelling against you?
Well, luckily she's not really motivated to, one, she doesn't have, she's still on the payroll. So I'm bringing the food in.
Fair enough.
Yeah. And
you're still the cook.
Yeah, I'm still the cook. And so she's not like out there making dinner. So I'm making still meals and I know what she'll kind of usually like. And so if I make something with like a, kind of like a taco salad sort of, theme to it, she usually loves that. Just making like, garbanzo beans and ground beef and a bunch of different vegetables. And so I try to put 6 vegetables and 6 herbs in every single dinner.
Nice.
And I literally will say to her, I'm like, okay, here's the 6 vegetables or here's the 6, and she doesn't really care about the 6 herbs or spices, but just kind of letting her know, this can taste good and you're still getting your vegetables. The breakfast, like I will, if I make her, good old, oat groats and buckwheat groat, kind of like a grain porridge or something, she'll eat it if I'm making it. And so trying to do those, or even my, waffles where maybe I'm not getting away with as much kale in there. I can't be green, but, a little beet in there kind of disguises that kale. So usually if I'm making things for her and presenting it to her, she's much more likely to be eating it. It's really when she gets a hold of a little bit of money from her jobs and goes down and accesses the standard American diet, fare. So, she will get away with like fast food, like, Carl's Jr. or some, horrific kind of, and honestly, I can only, bring the horse to water at this point, but I'll be like
we all can.
Yeah, I'll be like, oh, you kind of seemed a little low energy, or you seem a little, more depressed, and just kind of bring some awareness to how she's presenting herself. And then also, conversely, be like, wow, you seem like you're in a really good mood. Are you doing some good self-care today? And just kind of be like, are you aware of what's causing you to be up and down?
I think this is so interesting. I've worked with adult children, or young adults, I guess you could say, in their 20s. And I remember them just saying, I wish my parents did feed me better food. Like, kids really want to feel healthy. And of course, they're going to fight for the yogurt with the colorful sprinkles and all the colorful chips that are out there with all the very savory flavors. But when they're adults and they reflect on that, they often are upset with their parents. They wish their parents were more firm, just as you want your parents to pay attention to how you're driving, what time you're going to bed, all of those other things that you're talking about, values. Yes. That food is a value, and the kids will honor and respect you when you do set those limits. And I wonder why food fell into that category, that it's negotiable.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like you were talking about food rewards too, and I do, talk to parents about that. I'm like, think of non-food rewards, 100%. Even like, a pat on the back and like, hey, let's go, time, right? Time, and let's go do some fun game, let's watch our favorite, show, or, all these things that can be rewards for behavior, or, doing a good job and such, And then, like we said, there could be food rewards, especially like if it is like appropriate for the occasion, right? But it's like inserting all these food rewards in places where I'm like, why are we doing a food reward there? Like, the end of soccer,
Right. Or getting in the car. Hey, you get a candy bar. No, you're just getting in the car.
Right. It's like,
Straight
good
up.
job. Now we're going to point B.
Exactly.
And so, kind of definitely, teasing apart when food's appropriate, because we do have an obesity crisis on our hands here. And it's like, and if we're kind of making kids think like, oh, if I do a good job, I'm going to eat, and that's what they're taking into adulthood, or, oh, the way that I make myself feel better because this is what mom did, you are absolutely cementing that message, and they will carry that over into adulthood and have some sort of eating issues. And we don't want it to go backfiring to an eating disorder where they're like, oh, I don't like my body now. I feel shameful about my body. I'm going to go and starve myself or be unhealthy and such. And it causes a horrible relationship with food. And I do think my daughter will come back to realizing,
I know. I do feel she will, 100%. Yeah. I do.
Yeah, so maybe in 5 years when we have this podcast again, I'll be like, she's doing great, and she's now saying, Mom, that was the best decision ever.
I know she will, because I think it's a natural thing that kids go through. So when you're talking to parents, are they receptive? And are they finding great health outcomes when they're making these changes?
Yeah, so it's interesting. When people come to me, they're typically motivated, right? So I'm not dealing with, like, I at one point for this one job, I was working with a medical center, and I was working with the trucker union group, right? I'm trying to tell them how to eat better, and they're truckers on the road. They weren't coming to me for advice necessarily. This was part of their medical plan at that point. Boy, that was a tough needle to move. But when parents come to me, through Unblind My Mind and, having read the book Fat, Stressed, and Sick, MSG, Processed Foods, and America's Health Crisis, they're coming to me because they're already they're ready for the message, and they're ready to take some action. Now, that said, I still will encounter, particularly moms that are very anxious about making some of these changes.
Really?
because they're already overwhelmed. So if you have, the mom who's doing all of the work in the house with bringing in the food and feeding and taking care of the kids' schedules, and then they have a special needs child on top of that, they could be overwhelmed. But that energy is part of the story. The kids are feeding off of that energy. Mom's worried, mom's anxious, and it's contributing to the negative energy in the household also. So I kind of try to work with parents think about the energy you're bringing into the household.
Right.
And that will help calm survival responses too. So if your child is anxious or worried or depressed, what kind of energy are you bringing to the home environment that would help them feel calm and peaceful, or even joy and abundance and love and whatnot. So I do try to work with the parents on their energy, and that's important with calming a survival response down, and giving them, ideas of how they would go grocery shopping and what their routine would look like, and what are their family dynamics. Oh, you have a child that's 4, 7, and 10. Okay, just kind of give them some meal ideas that might be appropriate for their family structure and, some of their kids' preferences. I'll kind of like, okay, how about this? How about this? And just try to give them a visual after we get off our consultation of how are they going to actually navigate it. And
they need to have hope that there is an end at the tunnel, that kids they will acclimate.
Right, exactly. That you're retraining their palate. I do usually advocate that this is an entire family journey. It's not 100%. Like isolating, one child because they have this particular health condition. And so I talk about like inflammatory load, right? So everybody's got their own inflammatory load. You could have stubbed your toe and your inflammatory load is a little bit more. You ran through some poison oak. Your, inflammatory load might be higher on any given day, or you had a stressful day, whatnot, right? So everybody's inflammatory load will vary throughout their life, or even, within their day.
Yeah, and let the people know, like, stress can be an inflammation producer.
Absolutely, right? And so you're going through a stressful...
There's so many different ways that we could have inflammation in our body, but we know that's one of the main link to illnesses and sickness.
Exactly, right? It's the root cause.
Right. So you have to get to the root of where the inflammation is coming from.
Right. So what I, structure with parents is like, okay, let's start off with reducing your inflammatory load. Start off with food. And I do talk about the microbiome quite a bit too, because a lot of people have been through some sort of microbiome assault of, something like antibiotics, or even stress can, cause a microbiome assault. And so
probably is, I'm sorry to interrupt, but isn't this one of the most important things too, the gut microbiome and mental health?
Well, exactly, right? So our food is feeding the microbes, and the microbes are producing a bunch of neurotransmitters that are regulating our mood and metabolism and so forth. And so these trillions of microbes need to be considered in the equation. And I love data. Like I love, directing people like, okay, go get a stool test or do these things and look to see what's going on. And so, but there are, so if after they come back to me and their response is wonderful, like I've gotten beautiful responses. Okay, my kid's talking now. Okay, my kid's like actually said, I love you, like they're talking, and so all these wonderful, emoting of expressions and whatnot. But there are some that are much more complex, like an autoimmune condition or a latent viral infection that's not being picked up by kind of some traditional lab testing that's, done in the doctor's office and such. And so I'll kind of direct them down the deeper dive. And genetics, so, just kind of like looking to see what we can do with data to give them the best, information and actions that will help improve quality of life.
Right. And I imagine that some of these doctors must be like scratching their heads, like, how did you heal your autism? Some people might say that autism is a condition that is a life sentence.
Yeah, and I never say the word cure. I always say the word manage.
Manage, okay.
And, I've attended a lot of, medical conferences on autism and such. And one thing that I thought was a fascinating sort of study that looked at the brain wiring of, and that's through these various scans that are done on infants versus 5 years old of normal what they call neurotypical versus neurodivergent category. Neurodivergent often being what's in the autism spectrum.
Right.
And what they showed was that the glutamate signaling initially of the infants was very similar in the normal neurotypical and neurodivergent. But normally what you do through the survival response is you start to prune some of those neurons that are no longer needed for that survival response. You're becoming more calm and adapted in your world. That's neurotypical. Neurodivergent, they don't prune those. So a lot of the neurodivergent has that excessive glutamate signaling neurologically wired in the brain.
Wow.
They are more prone to stress events in their life. And they likely will be more prone potentially for the rest of their lives. So it's managing a lot of these things, and you don't want to exacerbate it through foods or negative energy in the household and things like that you can, teach them all these sorts of skills that will help them manage those stress responses, because they likely will be more vulnerable.
Yeah, and I love the fact that just giving your child the awareness, like, how are you feeling after that? And helping put words to their feelings.
Right.
A lot of people don't have the words for their emotions or how they're feeling. So if we can help the child understand, I feel really great after that food, or I'm feeling tired. I know when I have my clients fill out questionnaires, I definitely say, how are you feeling before and after your food?
Yeah.
And that's a huge indicator. And to help the child identify with how they're feeling, even if they're having enough water and if they're hydrated enough, and how are their bowel movements, and all of those things come into play with the whole trifecta. And as they get older, they're going to pay more attention to that.
Yeah, and with the neurodivergent category is validating their feelings, because some environmental input might be really, really strongly received by them, where we'd be like, what's the big deal? Right. So that was a big one that I've kind of learned through this process too, is true. Wow, I hear that really upsets you. Explain that more to me. And that helps them regulate and bring down that survival response too.
And then they can feel heard, because doesn't everybody want to feel heard?
Yep.
Right? I was with a mom, and she has a daughter on the spectrum, and the daughter was very expressive with, Mom, I'm feeling really overwhelmed with having to talk to so many people. And I was like, wow, that's so fantastic that she was able to tune in to stuff. A lot of adults can't even tune into how they're managing their own stress. I love that. Katie, this has been fantastic.
Oh, thank you, Jill, for having me on your show.
I know. We have so many more things to talk about. I have so many more questions I want to ask you. So again, folks, I just wanted to say I'm Jill Troderman, and you are listening to Feeding Your Family. I'm here with Dr. Katie Reid. She has a new book out. Please check it out. It's called Fat, Stressed, and Sick, MSG, Processed Foods, and America's Health Crisis. Now, Katie, you do individual counseling. And tell us more about where people can find you, and what's your website?
Yeah, so unblindmymind.org. So Catherine Reid is my, my professional name. And, so Katie is,
Katie, right.
Because Jill and I have been friends now for many years. And CatherineReidPhD.com is also where I have my author page.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, and so both of those websites, you can find me and sign up for consultations, or, purchase the book. It's also available on Amazon.
All right. Well, this is so great. I hope we've helped a lot of families out there, knowing that you guys can make positive changes in the world. Your kids will love you for it. I know my kids do. And thanks, everybody, for tuning in. This is my first show here at Santa Cruz Voice.